Welcome back to Inhibition, part 2 of destroying every gun control argument. Steve Hofstetter has claimed to destroy every anti-gun control argument in 15 minutes. We went through the first 6 in the last video. This is going to be part 2 of destroying Steve Hofstetter claiming to destroy anti-gun control arguments. We're going to break this down. You want to stick around because we're going to talk about Hitler and about minding your own business. It's time we talk about it. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me. I just want to say thank you to everyone who has subscribed. I just hit 35 subscribers. That is super exciting. If you're interested in this type of content, we post content related to conservative topics every week. So if you're interested, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell down below, and let's jump into the topic. We're going to jump right into number 7 from Steve Hofstetter. Let's go.
Number 7. This isn't any of your business. This is a quick one, because kids getting shot at schools and adults getting shot at concerts is everyone's business. Mass shootings don't have to happen to me in order for me not to want them to happen to other people.
Alright, so he says, the argument is this is none of your business, and he says it's everyone's business, because kids getting shot at school and people getting shot at a concert, it's everyone's business. So there's a few issues I have with this. First of all, this is the don't you care about the children argument. This is by definition what's called an appeal to emotion. You can even see there it's also known as the for the children argument. And it's a general category, many different types of fallacies that use emotion in place of reason in order to attempt to win the argument. It's manipulation used in place of valid logic. When someone says it's not your business, they're not saying mass shootings aren't your business. They're saying me owning a gun when I haven't used it in a mass shooting and don't kill children with it is none of your business. That's what they're saying. But he flips the argument and starts talking about children and mass shootings and don't you care about these people dying? It's an appeal to emotion. But this can be flipped right back around on Steve. If we want to use the appeal to emotion, we can. This can be flipped right back around on. He talks about the mass shootings, but what he doesn't tell you is that defensive gun uses every year total at a low estimate of 55,000 to 80,000 incidents per year, while high-end estimates reach around 4.7 million per year. Now we'll talk about those numbers in just a second, but at the very low end, 55 to 80,000. That same study that says 55 to 80,000 was repeated and says around 100,000 per year, and then high-end estimates over 4 million.
Why didn't you tell me?
There are different surveys, different studies that have been done on this. There's the National Crime Victimization Survey, the National Defense Survey. David Hemingway, who's a professor of health policy at the Harvard School of Public Health, did a survey and did a study on this. The National Survey on Private Ownership and Use of Firearms by the Chilton's polling firm for the foundation on a research grant from the National Institute of Justice in 1997. There was also a study done by Kleck and Gertz and Cook and Ludwig, who repeated Kleck and Gertz study. Now, we'll talk about these different studies and kind of what they showed in just a second. Some of these have problems. Some of these probably overestimate. Some of these underestimate. But again, at the low end estimate, it's 55 to 80,000 per year. Now remember that around 80,000 per year is the low end estimate. Keep that in mind. But let's talk about these different studies real quick. You can go look all these studies up and do the research. Some of them good studies, some of them have a little bit of problem, but these are the main ones that people look at. Cook and Ludwig said of NCVS, NSPOF, and Kleck surveys, those surveys, he said the key explanation for the difference between the 108 NCVS estimate for the annual number of defensive gun uses and the several million from the surveys discussed earlier is that NCVS avoids the false positive problem by limiting defensive gun use questions to persons who first reported that they were crime victims. Most NCVS respondents never have a chance to answer the defensive gun use question falsely or otherwise. In other words, the ones with the 4 million uses, they're saying there's the potential for false positives because many of those people who are gun advocates might lie on a survey just to make the number sound more. There could be several reasons for false positives. So they say maybe that 4 million number is a little overestimated. And so the NCVS and that one, they lower that number by only asking the question about using the gun defensively when the person indicates or says yes to the question about have they been a victim of a crime. Clayton Kramer and David Barnett say that such a structure, just asking that question only when they say yes to being a victim of a crime, could cause the NCVS number to undercount defensive gun uses, because someone who has successfully defended themselves with a gun may not consider themselves a victim of a crime. Many times people who successfully defended themselves, for example, somebody tries to break into their home and they grab their gun, and sometimes even just the sound, we know that people have the sound of a shotgun or the sound of a gun has scared the person away, and that person ended up defending themselves with a gun that way, but yet never was actually victimized because of the gun. So people will sometimes answer, no, I've not been a victim of a crime. Well, if they answer no, they're not getting the question. So it says in this NCVS, if one says they have not been a victim of a crime, the survey assumes there was no attempted crime and does not go on to ask if they ever had used the gun in self-defense. And according to Jens Ludwig, estimates of the frequency of DGU, defensive gun uses, from the NCVS appear to be too low, but those from phone surveys like that conducted by Kleck and Gertz appear to be too high.
Unsportsmanlike conduct. Offense number 17. Unsportsmanlike conduct. 57. Defense number 57. All penalties offset. Fourth down.
So the answer is actually somewhere in the middle. It's not over 4 million, but it's not as low as 100,000 either. It's up there higher than that, but somewhere in between. So even if you take that low estimate of 100,000, it's going to be higher than that. Maybe lower than 4 million, but it's going to be higher than 100,000. That's the point. That's what the experts have come to the conclusion of. So now let's look at all firearm deaths. According to the CDC, every year, and this was from 2019, but every year there's around 40,000 deaths by guns. 39,707 in this case, to be exact. 39,707, all firearms related to death. Now, remember, the low estimate of defensive gun uses was around 100,000 or 80,000. At the low estimate, defensive gun uses more than double gun deaths at the low estimate. And we know that that's not the correct number. It's going to be higher than that. But at the very lowest estimate, defensive gun uses double the amount of gun death. Meaning, guns are used to save lives twice as much as they are used to take lives. So the question is, why doesn't he care about the children being saved by guns? Why, Steve wants to play the emotional argument. Oh, it's about the children, school shootings. Well, why doesn't he care about the children saved by guns, and taking guns out of homes will actually harm children? But he doesn't make that argument. See, he doesn't want you to know all of it. And then he speaks specifically of school shootings and the shootings at concerts, these mass shootings. Well, let's talk about mass shootings, because if we say they're used defensively twice as much as gun deaths, that actually doesn't show the whole picture when it comes to mass shootings. Mass shootings only make up 0.2% of total firearm deaths. 0.2%. That is less than 1% of firearm deaths are from a mass shooting. So this argument that mass shootings are so terrible and we need to stop mass shootings and we need to care about mass shootings, less than 1% of that 40,000 gun deaths is from a mass shooting. Less than 1%, 0.2%. As a matter of fact, even in mass shootings, these are the guns used in all mass shootings from 1987 to present. You can see down there at the bottom, rifles are used significantly less than handguns. Rifles are used significantly less in mass shootings than handguns. Yet it's not the handguns that everybody's freaking out about. Although some of the arguments they make would affect handguns, they're mainly wanting an assault weapons ban assault weapon is a term that has no agreed upon meaning, but they're wanting to ban those rifles, those AR-15s, the scary semi-automatic rifles. That's what they're arguing to ban. That's the biggest push for gun control that we have right now, and yet those only account for a small portion of the 0.2% of firearm deaths for mass shooting.
This is a ghost gun. This right here has ability with a 30 caliber clip to disperse with 30 bullets within half a second. 30 magazine clip in half a second.
So it's even smaller for shootings with rifles. Matter of fact, we want to talk about the amount of times rifles kill people. Here is the number of murder victims in the United States in 2019 by what they were murdered by. And if you see down here, rifles, 364. 364 people in the whole country out of 300 million, 364 in 2019 are the rifles. But if you look up here, knives kill almost 1,500 people per year. Rifles killed less people than knives. Yet they want to ban the rifle, but nobody's banning the knives. As a matter of fact, rifles killed less people than personal weapons such as hands, fists, and feet. That more people are killed with fists than they are with rifles every single year. But we don't want to talk about that because gun control, because big AR-15 black gun, scary. Big gun, scary. It's a weapon of war. We need to get rid of it. The statistics and data do not support this argument at all. There's also another problem I see here, and that the argument is that you have no business knowing anything about what I own or how I own it or the guns in my house that I haven't done any crimes with. And his response is, well, no, mass shootings are everybody's business. This argument assumes all gun owners are mass shooters, that anyone who wants to own a rifle must be wanting to commit a mass shooting. They all must be sick in the head. He has such a problem with guns that he's willing to equate millions of people in the country to mass shooters without any evidence just because he's scared of a gun. His irrational fear has caused him to label and call everyone in the country a mass shooter or a potential mass shooter. It is a very sick and disgusting argument. Let's look at his next argument.
Number 8. Registration won't actually do anything. This is a great argument if you don't understand chain of liability distribution. In most states, when a private seller sells a gun to someone with no background check that is later used in a crime, do you know who's at fault? No one. Almost every state allows private sales of firearms with no background checks. And in most states, if you leave a loaded weapon unattended on a sidewalk, the steepest punishment you'll get is the fine for littering. What registration does is take straw purchases from an honor system to an easily trackable crime. And it's not just about creating laws that would prevent the sale of firearms to people who are not mentally fit to own them. It's about creating laws that are actually smart enough to stop that from happening. Registration makes sure that the buyer and the seller are both responsible for following the law, instead of just hoping they'll be. Number 9.
So in this argument, he connects two things. He talks about background checks. And he says most states you can purchase private guns without the background check, and therefore we don't know where the guns are. And then he flips from background check to gun registry. And I want to point out that registration and background checks, these go hand in hand. A universal background check, which people right now are arguing for, and there's a lot of people who argue for a universal background check and don't want a gun registry, or say that they don't want a gun registry. But there is absolutely no way to enforce a universal background check law on private sales unless you have a gun registry. For example, if I want to sell my gun to my neighbor, I'm required to give him a background check. But if I don't, and then he gets caught with that gun, no one's going to know the difference. They won't know if he had a background check or not. They can't prove it. There's no registry or database to check it against, so they don't know. So universal background check does absolutely nothing without a gun registry. A gun registry, on the other hand, if I register my guns, if I sell a gun to my neighbor and there is no universal background check and he registers that gun but has criminal intent, if there was no background check, it does nothing to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. Both are needed. You can't have one effective without the other. So first of all, I want to point out that him making that claim and him linking that together contradicts a lot of people who claim they want universal background checks, but not a gun registry. You can't have one without the other and it actually be effective. That being said, are they effective? He says that of course they'll be effective. He gives no data, no facts, no evidence. He just simply says, well, of course they're effective. That's not an argument, Steve. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to debunk your argument that it would not be effective by simply saying that it would. You need to provide some evidence. Well, let's look at some evidence. The state of California has had a universal background check law on the books for 10 years. Researchers at UC Davis School of Medicine have studied gun violence in California during that period and found there was no change in the number of gun homicides or gun suicides in that 10-year period since they've had the universal background check law. Nothing. Didn't save nothing. They have a registration. They're required to register their guns. They got nothing. No ability to stop it. Another study found that the repeal of universal background check laws in Tennessee and Indiana had no effect on gun homicides or suicide rates in either state. That we used to have universal background checks in Tennessee and Indiana. They got rid of those laws. No effect. It didn't slow down or didn't make gun homicides go way up just because they got rid of the universal background check. Johns Hopkins School of Public Health looked at universal background checks in large urban counties in the U.S. and found that they were actually associated with an increase in firearm homicides in those counties. A study found no benefit of a universal background check law without accompanying permit to purchase. Unless you had a permit to purchase the gun, there was absolutely no benefit in the universal background check or registration at all. So why is that? Why does the universal background check and the registration, why does that not work?
Tell me more, tell me more. Tell me more, tell me more.
Well, let's look. A 2016 Department of Justice report said that among state and federal prisoners who had possessed a firearm during the offense for which they were serving time, about 25% of the people had obtained their gun from an individual. So about 25% of it obtained from an individual. But notice, about 8% of that was purchased or traded from a family or friend, which would require a universal background check under a universal background check system. But 6.5% of those rented or borrowed from a family friend, which would not require, if they just borrowed a gun from somebody, that does not require a background check. And then the last one was a gift or purchase. It was a gift or purchase for the prisoner. That's about 10%, which would require the background check. So out of this, about 18%, this study found that about 18% of criminals, prisoners in the federal prisons who had possessed a firearm during that offense, about 18% of them got the guns from an individual, from a private sale. Only about 18%. That means that the vast majority of prisoners who had guns didn't purchase it from an individual, didn't get the gun from an individual, and therefore a universal background check would have done nothing to stop them. A 2018 FBI study of mass shootings, since we're talking about mass shootings, said only 2% of mass shooters purchased the gun illegally, while 6% stole the gun. Most purchased the gun legally with a background check. So, gun registry and universal background checks, the vast majority of mass shootings would not have been stopped at all by those. Only 2% purchased the gun illegally. 2%. 6% stole the gun, and the rest purchased the gun legally with a background check, which a universal background check would not have changed, nor would a gun registry. So no, they would not have stopped or helped mass shooting. His entire argument here isn't backed up by facts or data, which is why he provides none. It's why he says, oh, registrations don't work? Well, they do. No, they don't. And the evidence shows they don't, but he doesn't talk about that because facts and data actually hurt his argument. Let's go to the next argument.
Number 9. Hitler made people register guns. The Weimar Republic, which is the government that preceded Hitler, had strict gun control laws. And when the Nazis seized power, they relaxed those restrictions. The incorrect theory that you're unknowingly quoting comes from a guy named J. Simpkin. Simpkin, who was aptly named, wrote a book in 1992. In it, he illogically compared gun restrictions in 1928 Germany to what he feared might happen in the modern-day United States. Why is that illogical? Because Hitler didn't come to power until 1932, which makes it very difficult for Hitler to have enacted gun restrictions in 1928, you Simpkins. Also, pardon me if I don't believe your faux outrage at Hitler when you're perfectly fine with Steve Bannon. If you actually cared about the safety of Jewish people, you'd investigate the terrorism at the Capitol. Number 10.
So first of all, just to address that last point, how absolutely ignorantly bigoted is this statement? Assuming that everyone who supports guns and doesn't want stricter gun control, doesn't want to investigate the Capitol attack, or does support Steve Bannon is laughable. And investigating the Capitol attack has nothing to do with protecting the Jews just because someone was wearing an Auschwitz shirt at the Capitol. That's one person wearing one shirt, does not have anything to do with the actual attack at the Capitol. Absolutely horrific argument. Aside from that, his argument about Hitler falls apart very fast. Let's look at why. In 1938, the Nazi Party reformed weapons laws thoroughly, yes, and it did relax existing regulations. Even though it solely benefited privileged members of the Nazi Party and its associated organizations, the law stated that certain groups of the Nazi Party officials did not need any permit anymore for weapons possession. So in a sense, yes, he relaxed or, made the restrictions not so strong for people in the Nazi Party. That's the party left out. The new weapons laws, however, prohibited the possession of any weapons to certain groups of people, namely gypsies and all individuals who lost their civil honors who were under supervision of the police. So anyone who was just a gypsy automatically lost their gun rights, illegal to possess a weapon, and anyone who lost their civil honors, anyone who was under the supervision of the police and had lost their civil honors. Before you say, well, yeah, criminals shouldn't have rights to those weapons, let me clarify what losing your civil honors is. That group included people convicted due to homosexuality. Gay people weren't allowed to have guns. Yeah, he really relaxed those gun laws, Steve. Yeah, yep, that's what he did. Matter of fact, directly after the Kristallnacht, which I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of, the possession of any weapons by Jews was prohibited. And that was enacted in November of 1938. Any possession of any weapon by Jews was prohibited. He seized the guns from the Jews. So he took guns from people. He didn't just, it was a confiscation, and he didn't just relax gun laws. He relaxed gun laws on certain people while making them stricter on others. But he doesn't tell you that. How did he know what Jews, homosexuals, and gypsies had guns? How did he know to be able to confiscate them? How did he know? Oh yeah, the gun registry. Now, before we go any further, he's correct. The Weimar Republic is the one who enacted the gun registry, not Hitler. But that is irrelevant because that's not the point. The point isn't that Hitler was the one who enacted the gun registry. The point is that Hitler used the gun registry to take guns from certain classes of people that he didn't like, so he could then round them up and murder them. That's the point. The gun registry, he didn't have to enact a gun registry. It was already in existence. He took the one that was already in existence and abused it. That is exactly the argument against a gun registry. While the people enacting the gun registry might claim to have good intentions and might sound all wonderful and nice, ultimately there could rise someone to power who abuses it and takes the guns from innocent people that can then be attacked by the very government that took the gun. That's the argument against gun registry. He did not destroy the argument about Hitler by saying, well, Hitler wasn't technically the one who enacted the registry. Who cares? That's not the point. It's not the point. And this lie, this defense of Hitler, this disgusting defense of Hitler to say Hitler relaxed gun laws by being dishonest and not acknowledging that he actually made gun laws stricter for certain people while relaxing it for people that agreed with him, It is disgusting to defend Hitler in that way. Wow, he just put himself in the position of a Nazi.
Nazi!
Nazi?
Nazi! Nazi!
What did this evil Nazi do?
Let's look at the next argument.
The terrorism at the Capitol. Number 10. Criminals won't follow the law, so what's the point? What a wonderful argument against laws. What is the point of a law? A law is to act as a deterrent. Yes, people still often break the law, but way fewer people do something when it's illegal than when it isn't. No one thinks that gun control will end 100% of gun violence. The point is to end some of it. Also, do you think the average person who shoots up a school knows how the black market works? Do you think the black market is just a store in a strip mall next to Joann's Fabrics? You don't just say, Alexa, help me commit crimes. Because if you did, Alexa would just play songs by Leanne Rimes. It is difficult for the average person to buy illegal things without getting caught. And this would make it more difficult, which is a good thing.
So he says that the purpose of laws are to get rid of some gun violence. Not all, that it'll never get rid of all, and we just need to get rid of some of the gun violence. There are two major problems with this. First, if the point is just to stop some gun violence, then we would have stopped adding laws a long time ago, because we've already added thousands of laws across state and federal level for gun control. Thousands. Meaning that we've already set it up where we clearly must have already stopped some of the gun crime. And if the issue's not all of it, then why do we keep going? You see, it's always just a little bit more. Oh, we do this. Well, there's still more violence, so let's add this. So there's still more violence, so let's add this. There's still more violence, so let's add this law. And it goes on and on and on. If your argument is just we should add gun laws just to make it a little bit harder for criminals, that argument never ends until ultimately you have restricted all gun rights from all law-abiding citizens. Because you can always add something else to stop just a little bit more of crime. That's not a good argument to take away people's rights. But the other issue is he defeats his own argument and doesn't realize it. If the issue is just stopping more crime, well, let's think about crime here. If laws are a deterrent to keep people from doing wrong things, then don't we already have a law in the book about killing innocent people? It's laws against murder. Doesn't that already exist? So the issue here isn't deterring people from committing the crime, because if so, then a law against murder should be enough. But it's not. The issue has nothing to do with deterring people from crime, because again, laws that make those things a crime are already on the books and isn't deterring them enough, clearly causing Stephen and anyone who supports gun control to want to start now affecting law-abiding citizens, because the deterrent of the law itself isn't working according to
Dessert. So, what's the point anyway? Won't work. Could you?
He defeats his own argument. But he says this is an argument against laws, as if this argument against more laws for gun control is equivalent to argument against laws for everything else. But murder laws do not punish law-abiding citizens. Theft laws do not punish law-abiding citizens. Assault laws do not punish law-abiding citizens. Any of these type of laws only affect the criminal, not law-abiding citizens. Gun control doesn't just affect the criminal, it affects law-abiding citizens. You're making it more difficult for law-abiding citizens to have guns, and sometimes even claiming that you don't want law-abiding citizens to have certain guns. You are punishing law-abiding citizens. So no, it's not the same as other laws. You can't say it's an argument against all laws. No, the argument isn't that we shouldn't have laws. The argument is that our laws should affect the criminals and not affect and punish law-abiding citizens. That's the argument. So no, Steve, you're wrong. It has nothing to do with arguing against all law. He also says that the black market, that if we make it difficult for them to get guns, how are they going to get guns? Do you think the average shooter knows how to get guns from the black market? You think the black market's this store down by Joann's Fabrics? You think you could just ask Alexa, get me a gun? What a ridiculous argument. The black market is not where people are getting their guns. For example, all of these school shooters that he listed here, 5 out of the 6 got their gun legally. They went through a background check. So all of the laws, all of the rules, all of the things he wants to enact wouldn't have kept these people from getting a gun, and they wouldn't have needed to go to a black market. They would have just bought the gun and passed the background check. 5 of the 6 got it legally. The 6th one, he stole the gun from his mom, and his mom bought it legally through a background check. It doesn't matter. You don't need to get it through a black market. You can steal a gun. Where is this idea that the only way to get a gun if you can't purchase it legally is some underground, hidden, mysterious black market? No, he stole a gun. The rest bought it legally with a background check that wouldn't have been stopped by any of the proposed gun control laws. Absolutely an absurd argument.
Fail spectacular.
Number 11. The government is bound to mess this up. Maybe, but that's also true when it comes to enforcing any law. So again, unless you're advocating abolishing all laws, you can't make that argument. Number 12.
Again, what a ridiculous argument. No, you don't have to argue to abolish all laws because the government might mess them up. Again, all laws do not infringe on the rights of law-abiding citizens. You don't get to infringe upon my rights as the U.S. government because you're trying to stop criminals. A murder law does not infringe upon my rights. So no, we don't need to abolish laws. We need to abolish any laws that give the government the right to infringe upon my rights. That's the difference. It's the argument he's not going to make. That is a stupid argument. Let's hear his next argument.
Number 12. Gun ownership is a right and not a privilege. You know what else is a right? A speedy trial. That's in the 6th Amendment. Yet look at our court systems. The 8th Amendment specifies no cruel and unusual punishment, but many of you are fine with the death penalty. The 10th Amendment specifies states' rights, yet there are thousands of federal laws that supersede those. How about the 7th Amendment that specifies a right to a jury trial for any civil matter involving more than $20, although the current standard is $75,000. And what about the 5th Amendment? Due process. Some of you make the argument that cops are allowed to just kill people they're afraid of. Hell, even the good guy with a gun argument is in direct violation of due process. A civilian shooting someone is not due process. The reality is that the people who argue that the Second Amendment is a right and not a privilege don't actually understand any of our other rights. And if you're questioning whether or not a comedian is enough of a constitutional scholar to make this video, okay, aside from this video being full of well-researched, fully sourced arguments, I'm an honors-level American history graduate of Columbia University. I'll put my diploma up against your memes any day. Number 13.
First of all, addressing that last point he just made, saying that he is an honors level graduate at a school. First of all, what was your degree in? Just because you graduated from a college doesn't make you somehow magically an expert at constitutional law. So that is a completely ridiculous argument, and it's an attempt at an argument from authority, which is by definition a logical fallacy. Someone who is smart would actually know that. But aside from his smugness there, he points out that he'll put his diploma against your memes any day, as if the only people arguing against gun control are people with memes, completely ignoring the fact that there are people way smarter than him with much more expertise in the area of gun violence, in the area of constitutional law, in the area of all of those things than him, who argue against his points. So pretending that he is somehow smarter than everybody arguing against gun control is absolutely not only ridiculously laughable, but absolutely narcissistic and arrogant. Aside from that, he says his arguments were well-sourced, thought-out arguments, and we've been able to easily debunk every one of them with facts and evidence from actual sources that he never quotes. So no, his arguments are not well-sourced either. Let's jump into this argument though. He's arguing that we already have rights that are violated, so it's okay to violate more. That is the most ridiculous argument I've ever heard. Arguing that rights are being violated already, so let's violate more, is not a good argument. The argument to we are violating rights already should be, hey, let's stop violating those rights too. Not let's violate more rights. Completely ridiculous argument. But even the things he says are violations of rights aren't actually. For example, he mentions a speedy trial. And in court, they actually undertake a speedy trial analysis that differs depending on the law that's at hand. Under the U.S. Constitution, there is no set time for what a speedy trial is. Therefore, when a defendant claims a violation, the court applies a balancing test. They assess the length of the delay, the reason for the delay, whether the defendant asserted the speedy trial right, and whether the weight compromised the defense. That's what they look at. That's a test they follow. Most of the time, speedy trial on average is considered around 8 months. That does not mean the trial has to happen within 8 months. It's 8 months, first of all, from the time that they are arrested. So there could be a crime, and there could be 6 to 8 months before that person ever gets arrested for the crime because of investigation and gathering. The speedy trial only starts once the accused is arrested. So once they're arrested, they have the right to a speedy trial, and it's 8 months from then. So it could go longer than 8 months. On top of that, even if it goes over 8 months, there are many different reasons for that. 8 months is just kind of an average that people try to look at. Sometimes it could go longer than 8 months simply because the type of case that it is or the crime that was committed involves a lot of prep work for trial with a lot of investigation, and it's not easy to get through in 8 months. And if that's the case, then that is not violating the speedy trial rights according to the Supreme Court. So it can take longer than 8 months. It can take less than 8 months. Sometimes, currently, the Kyle Rittenhouse case, it has been over a year since the crime was committed, over a year since he was arrested. And even being over a year since he was arrested, he hasn't had trial yet, and it's not scheduled till November 1st. But it was actually scheduled for March, and the prosecution asked for more time to prepare their case, and the defense agreed to it. If you'd agreed to it, it's not violating your rights because you agreed to taking the longer time frame for the trial. So again, not everyone who goes a long time is violating a speedy trial right. Also, apart from the constitutional right, in the federal courts, there's a separate speedy trial right in the Speedy Trial Act. And where the state is involved, there's often a benchmark for the speedy trial evaluation. And for some states, the deadlines are strict, while in others, if the time limit's passed, they have to weigh factors, as in that balancing test that we just read. So no, speedy trial is not a right that is constantly being violated. And is there cases where it was? Yes. And we have a process in place that if someone believes that their speedy trial right was violated, they can appeal that and get that thrown out. That is something that we already have in place. No, the government is not just coming in and violating that right. What about cruel and unusual punishment and the death penalty? Well, the founding fathers who wrote the right against cruel and unusual punishment had the death penalty and did not see it as a violation of cruel and unusual punishment. Now, did all of them agree with the death penalty? No, there are many who didn't like the death penalty. The truth is, no one likes the death penalty. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have it. But it is not a violation of cruel and unusual punishment. It is not that kind of, it's not. The founding fathers didn't see it that way, and they're the ones who wrote that right into the Constitution. So, sorry. But just because you don't like the death penalty doesn't make it cruel and unusual punishment. The 10th Amendment says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved for the states respectively or to the people. This is the 10th Amendment. He says states' rights are guaranteed by the 10th Amendment, yet we have federal laws that supersede state laws. Notice the 10th Amendment doesn't say the laws. It says the powers. Completely different thing. When the founding fathers wrote the 10th Amendment, there were federal laws and there were state laws. State laws, ultimately, the goal was to have as much of the power as possible delegated to the states rather than to the federal government. Yes, we've expanded the federal government significantly. Yes, we should downsize the federal government, which is the exact opposite of what Steve would believe. Steve would believe in bigger government, the federal government taking control of more things. And yet he argues that that's a violation of the 10th Amendment, but he doesn't really believe that, because if he did, he wouldn't be arguing for bigger government. See, the truth is he's just using this as an attempt to try to manipulate you into thinking other rights are being violated. It's not. Federal laws are not a violation of the 10th Amendment. That is absurd. It makes no sense. All the 10th Amendment is saying is that if there's a power not delegated to the United States and not prohibited by the states can make the decisions. It doesn't mean the states can do whatever they want. It's an absurd argument to make. He also argues about this $20 clause from the 7th Amendment. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of common law. This is probably the closest thing to his best argument of a violation of the Constitution of another right, and it's not really. Let me explain why. It says $20. He says the current standard is for $75,000 at the federal level. It's not $75,000 at state level, but it's $75,000 at the federal level. And so it should be $20 and it's $75,000. The reason for that is simply inflation. That's all it is. In other words, originally $20 back in that day when that was written would have been closer akin to $75,000 than $20 of today. So because it was written at the time when $20 would be equal to $75,000, they've expanded that number to $75,000. However, if you disagree with that, which most people don't actually argue this, but if you disagree with that and believe that to be a violation, then fight against it. Don't fight for more violations in other amendments. Fight against the violation here. The reason this doesn't get fought against or brought up much, however, is because it doesn't affect many people. It is very rare that lawsuits or civil suits related to monetary value get brought up and requested for a jury to begin with. It's very rare for this to happen at the federal level, and it's even more rare for the person to want a jury. Most of the time, they want a judge to rule on their case, and that's how it goes, and they waive their right to that. So this isn't an issue that gets brought up often. That's why it's not fought against. But if you think it's wrong, fight against the violation. Don't argue for more violations. Then he talks about due process. And he says due process, people are arguing that cops can kill people just because they don't like them or they're afraid of them. No one is arguing cops can kill people just because you don't like them or you're afraid of them. And what he's implying there is that cops are afraid of black people and they should be able to shoot black people. No one's arguing that. Absolutely absurd, ridiculous argument. No one is saying cops can just shoot people because they're afraid of them or don't like them. What people are arguing about cops is that cops should be able to shoot threats that are attacking them. And he is absolutely hypocritical here because he says that it is other people who are arguing against gun control that think cops could just kill people because they are afraid of them. And yet he supports the cop shooting Ashley Babbitt because he was afraid at the Capitol. Now again, I'm not arguing anything about Ashley Babbitt on this video or saying that her death was justified or unjustified. I'm just pointing out the fact that he also argues that cops can kill people just because they're afraid of them, even though he's trying to pretend like he doesn't, and that's the other people watching the video that would argue that. He's a hypocrite. But actually, no one indeed is making the argument that cops can just kill people because they don't like them or just because they are afraid of them. We are arguing that cops should be able to shoot people when there is a legitimate threat. That being said, let's talk about due process. He says with due process that the good guy with a gun is a violation of due process. No, self-defense is not a violation of due process. What a ridiculously absurd argument. A good guy with a gun stopping a bad guy with a gun is self-defense. Self-defense is not a violation of due process. Due process is a requirement that legal matters be resolved according to the established rules and principles and that individuals be treated fairly. The established rules and principles allow for self-defense. Self-defense, therefore, is not a violation of due process. I do not have to allow myself to be murdered in order for this other person to be able to go to court. That is the dumbest argument that he could ever make.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points And may God have mercy on your soul.
What an absurdity. No, due process is not being violated. And he says that the people who argue that our rights are being violated with gun control don't understand our rights. And I've just proven that it is clearly Steve, who has the degree and the smart, intelligent one, is the one who does not understand our rights. He claims our rights are being violated when they're not. He doesn't know what due process is. And then the one example where he could potentially make an actual claim that the rights are being violated, such as the jury right for $20, if that's the one example you have, fight against that violation and quit trying to pretend that that violation makes it okay to violate other things. And that brings us to the end of our video, destroying every argument. That's part 2. That was taking us through argument number 12. You want to stick around for part 3, where we will continue to go through his ridiculous arguments and destroy every one of them. Steve does not know what he's talking about. And no, he is not destroying anti-gun control arguments. Until next time.
Thanks so much for watching. For more videos, click subscribe and hit that notification bell. And if you enjoyed the video, click that like button. See you next time.